I think it's a wonderful book.
Thank you.
Really. And so now, just to start, I would like you to describe your book to a possible reader. What would you say to a possible reader? How would you describe it?
I'd say that it was a multifaceted portrait of the world, the Western world as it is today, told through the story of two girls who were mature from the age of about 8 or 9 to their mid-20s in the course of the book. But it's not a single narrative. There are 5 different stories in 5 different styles. And eventually these become connected and you see how they relate to each other. But I wanted to give the reader a sense of variety and a constant sense of surprise. You finish one story, you begin another, and you don't understand at first the new world that I've placed you in, but gradually as the stories continue, you begin to see how they cohere.
There is in your book something special about this friendship, because it's like light in a dark world. And even the girls of the guns, which are terrible, are described in a positive way, especially when they sleep. And so I just wanted to know, are you attracted to childhood in the sense that you have a special feeling towards childhood, or are you talking about your own childhood in the book?
I'm partly talking about my own childhood, particularly in the story of the Crystal Garden, where the character called Roger, which is my second name, looks back with a very strong nostalgia, which may even be a false nostalgia for the security of his childhood. But of course, anyone who's had children lives through childhood twice, once for themselves and once as a spectator. And I've been a spectator to my daughter's childhood for the last 18 years. And I've seen them go from a kind of innocence, a kind of uncomplicated feeling that the world is a benign and simple place, to realizing that it's much more complicated and much darker than that. And that experience of watching their growing maturity is very much part of the inspiration of the story of Rachel and Alison.
But there are also very hateful characters in the book, and starting from Sir Peter Eves, to his daughter Josephine, to the guns themselves, and especially the wife. She is really terrible, and she's stupid, stupid and terrible, which is terrible. And what I hated most, though, are the television people, the reality people, and also the people that send their hateful messages to the world. And so I wanted to know, what do you think about that? What do you think about television and the possibility that television manipulates really people?
Yes, I think reality TV is a very misleading term, because it has less to do with reality than almost any other form of television. And it's a dishonest form of television, I think, because it purports to give you something real, something authentic, and that's one of the reasons that that people are drawn towards watching it, I think. Whereas a story, a made-up story, whether it's on television or whether it's in a book, has, to me, a kind of honesty about it, because there's a pure contract between the writer and the reader, that everything I'm going to tell you is a lie. If you've cleared all that ambiguity out of the way, then you're free to find a kind of truth together. Whereas when I watch a reality show, I'm constantly on my guard and thinking, is this really what happened? Why did they cut just then? How are they trying to manipulate me? How are they trying to control my perceptions? With social media, I think there's an upside and a downside to social media. I use it myself. I'm active on Twitter. I enjoy it as a way of keeping in touch with friends and with my readers. But there's also a kind of dark energy which is latent in people and which it provides an expression for. We've seen the re-emergence of a kind of mob mentality sometimes on Twitter, because people are very quick to rush to judgment.
Yeah.
The internet itself encourages a kind of binary thinking.
Yeah.
You know, like or dislike. You're either for it or against it. And for me, everything in life lies in between, in the grey areas, and there's not much room for that in social media.
Yeah, and then let's talk about madness. So madness is even in the subtitle of your book, and even Rachel, when she is in the gun's house, she has this moment in which she believes she's getting mad because of the silence, the emptiness, and she has the impression to see things that she sees, of course, because we know that at the end of the book. But do you think that madness has something to do with the life we lead, and also with the relationship? The fact that it's so difficult to have satisfying relationships.
Like my earlier novel, What a Carve Up, or La Familia Winshaw, which has a relationship with this book because it shares some of the same characters. I use a lot of techniques in this book from Gothic fiction and from horror fiction, because it began to strike me how many of the words that people use to describe the modern world actually belong to this genre of writing. They say this situation is horrific, this situation is crazy, this is madness, this is grotesque. These are words we apply to a certain kind of fiction. You know, a world of old castles and haunted houses and secret passages and terrible monsters. And you know, I thought there's a connection there between the two things. So I used the idea of madness metaphorically, but also there's a level of reality in it as well, because you know, one of the facts that made me want to write the book was one that I often heard as being described as mad, which was a statistic released by Oxfam, the charity, that 85 individuals own as much wealth between them as the poorest half of the world's population.
That's true. I mean, I read it.
Yeah. Well, how else can you describe that except as a kind of madness? And going one step beyond that, we read that in a newspaper, think, well, that's pretty bad, and we turn the page and read something else. That's a kind of madness as well, really. So this is the meaning of the epigraph of the book, that the madness is not just a situation, but our willingness to put up with it.
That's true. I do believe that. And there is something else in the novel, which is a sense of impending doom. You find it from the very beginning, the Black Tower, you know, the story that the brother tells Rachel about the man being dead and so on, and it goes on and on and on. And even the spiders, you know, the spider that is on the card gives you this sense of impending doom. And there is, so for the reader, the idea that there are good people that can save themselves, and the bad people, the enormously rich, the shrewd and whatever, that are condemned. So this is, in a sense, can be seen also as a moral tale. And what do you think about that? How could you comment?
I think that increasingly in the last 10 or 15 years, we've lived with a sense not of impending doom, but unease and instability. The thing that begins this feeling, really, in my novel, is the discovery by the girls of the death of David Kelly, the UN weapons inspector, and the realization that you know, in the world of politics, in the world of the elites who are watching over us, there is something mysterious and possibly something sinister happening. And then we have the crisis of 2008, which is not which you don't see happening in the book, because the book jumps from 2003 to 2012 or so. But, you know, for me, again, that created a sense of unease that, you know, in order to pursue our daily lives, we have to rely on certain things. We have to rely on certain stabilities and continuities. One of them is that the economy, the banking system, you know, it's pretty solid. We can rely on that. 2008 showed us this is not the case. It's a house of cards. It can collapse at any moment. Now, apparently, the crisis is gone, and that's not going to happen anymore. But do we believe that? I don't think we do. I don't think we believe that these people's behaviour has changed radically enough. So, you know, nowadays in our daily lives, we have a stronger sense, I think, than we used to of walking on a kind of quicksand, which could open up at any point.
And you were talking about David Kelly, and then I wanted to ask you a question on that, because his death is described as one of the darkest moments in the British recent history, and a stain on the nation. So, and you're very critical towards Blair's politics in the book. So, does this applies to politics in general, or only to that particular period? Which is your idea of what politics can do or not?
I started with that episode because I feel it was a turning point in British politics. Another great moment in British politics, of course, was 1997 when Tony Blair was elected, and it was a very exciting moment. A young Prime Minister talking again about social justice and turning back some of the worst policies of Thatcherism, and a gradual disillusionment began to set in, and a feeling that perhaps this wasn't quite such a new dawn. But I think the British people didn't really turn against Blairism until the war against Iraq in 2003, and I won't call them lies, but half-truths which were used to justify it. And, you know, we felt betrayed, and we felt we'd been treated like idiots, and that creates a lot of anger among people. And I chose the death of David Kelly because that really focuses that moment, and was also the kind of narrative episode that would make a strong impression, I thought, on two young girls, such as Rachel and Alison, who maybe didn't read the newspapers or watch the TV so much, but that single moment of one good person's avoidable death would strike them, I think.
And talking about England now, what is your idea? How would you describe your country now? And what do you strongly dislike about what's happening in England?
I think, you know, in all essentials, Britain is probably not so different from every other Western European country. People, there's a great pressure on people now. Just the day-to-day business of getting by, holding down your job, keeping everyday life moving forward and turning over, has become so consuming in a way that we don't really have the time, we don't really have the energy to think about the bigger things. And I feel there's a simmering low-level dissatisfaction with our leaders, a general sense that things are not quite right, not quite as they should be, but we don't know what to do about it. And that leads to a kind of inertia and also a kind of indifference and cynicism. That's what I find dangerous. That nobody believes politicians anymore, so we use these phrases like, well, they're all as bad as each other. And that means, in a way, that's a way of turning off your thinking faculties. And so I suppose that's what I most dislike about my country, this kind of cynicism and a sort of pessimism, really, that makes out that the situation is wrong but can never be made better again.
But that's what happens in Italy too, this dislike of politics and mistrust.
Yes, and you see what it produces in America. It produces Donald Trump, and a politician who cuts through that rhetoric and appears to be, offering a different solution.
Yeah.
And that kind of figure, what a solution! That kind of figure is dangerous.
Yeah. Now, two more personal questions. One concerns the movies, because you are very well known as a person, as a musician yourself, a person who loves music and so on. But I discovered, reading and translating The Crystal Gardener, that you are a lover and an expert in movies. So I just wanted to know which is your attitude towards movie, and one movie that you particularly liked.
I don't know if I describe myself as an expert, but
you don't.
I've had
felt that it's different.
I've had a love of cinema ever since I was a young boy, but I didn't go to the cinema very much as a child. All of the films I saw were on television. And, we were very lucky in Britain in the 60s and 70s. We had a lot of good TV scheduling. And, of course, to start with, I watched kids' films and adventure films and comedies and that sort of thing. But then in the 70s, there were a lot of seasons devoted to Buñuel and Fellini and Godard and Chabrol and all these great directors of European cinema, all of which I saw on TV. And my love of cinema really comes from that. The Crystal Garden relates very closely to a film which I've written about before and which I saw myself on television when I was about 12 or 13, which is a film by Billy Wilder called The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes. And apart from the fact that I like the film itself, another thing that fascinates me about it is that a lot of the film is lost. Only 2/3 of the film remains. The rest was cut out and the footage has disappeared. And to me this is a very beautiful idea. That somewhere there exists a version of my favourite film which is perhaps even better than the version we have. It's a kind of impossible ideal and dream, and it would drive you crazy in a way if you try to pursue that to its conclusion, which is what happens to Roger in The Crystal Garden.
Yeah. So
really, the story of The Crystal Garden is a story about the dangers of that kind of obsession. I wrote it to warn myself as much as anything else.
And the last question, which is personal too, concerns your novels. So this is your 11th novel. Then you wrote about non-fiction, and especially I remember a book on Humphrey Bogart, because when I was 15 I was very much in love with Humphrey Bogart, which is funny because usually you get in love with somebody else, but to me he was a myth. And so I wanted to ask you, concerning your books, which are the books you are more happy to have written and the books you are less happy to have written?
I'm going to talk about my very earliest books. I know one of my most popular books in Italy is The House of Sleep, La Casa del Sonno, and this is also one of my favourites, so it always touches me when I come to Italy to realise that this book is so well liked here. But just recently, in the last year or two, I've just started to develop an affection for my very first book, The Accidental Woman, Donna Picasso, which is completely different from my other books. Maybe this is why I like it. I can read it now and I'm almost reading it as if it was written by somebody else. But there's a special interplay in that book between the narrator and the central character, which is very strange and very particular, and I can't remember how I did it. And I suppose that's what's fascinates me. I'd like to write a book about that again, but I don't know how to anymore. So I like that one. For the one that I don't like so much, I'm afraid I'm going to mention a book that you yourself translated. No blame attaches to you in this respect. In Italian it's called This Night Has Opened My Eyes. And I haven't read this book since I adapted it myself for the cinema. And that was a very unsuccessful adaptation, and maybe that has something to do with why I have a bad feeling about this book. But I don't think about it. I push it to the back of my mind, and I pretend that I never wrote it. But just this time on my visit to Italy, a lot of readers are coming up to me with this book to sign and are saying that it's one of their favourites. This is starting to make me think that maybe I've missed something, and perhaps it's not quite how I remember it. So I'm going to look at this book again and maybe see.
Reread it.
Yeah, perhaps I should read it in Italian. Perhaps you improved it so much that Italian readers like it and nobody else does.
It could be nice, but I don't think it's like that.